In this lesson, we'll learn how to edit animation in Cinema 4D's F-Curve Manager. Let's play our animation again, and again we could see a very nasty pause that we'll need to clean up. This would be very difficult to do from here, so instead we can work with tools like the F-Curve Manager that will allow us to visually see our interpolation and edit it to get the exact look we need. So let me go ahead and show you a few ways we can load in the F-Curve Manager. We can do so from the Window menu, Timeline, and this is going to show us a few animation modes we have in Cinema 4D. So currently we're viewing a dope sheet type of layout called the Key mode. But notice right next to that we have our F-Curve mode. If we were to select our animated object, we can now start to see its function curves. And then next to that is our motion mode. When we're dealing with animation clips, we'd use this mode. But here's where we want to bring our attention, and here's why. Again, we can start to edit these curves, which represent our interpolation, to get the exact type of performance we'd like to see. So here's where we go to Polish Animation. Now these dots represent our keyframes. So as we see how the curve connects to these dots, again, this is just how our animation changes over time. So that's one way we can get to our F-Curve Manager. I'd also like to point out that if you'd like to see your animated tracks, you can go ahead and expand the object from here. Now another way is to select the animated object that we'd like to load in, and simply right-click and choose Show F-Curves. And notice that will automatically expand all of our animated tracks. Alright, so if we wanted to, we can now go in, we can left-click and start to move our keys around to edit the timing of our animation. So notice I've just dragged this key over. Now you can see that our up axis is changed pretty drastically. So I'll probably want to go ahead and undo that back. If we want to remove a keyframe, it's just a matter of selecting the key and pressing the delete key. So now notice we no longer have that rotation in our bank axis. So again, I'll go ahead and make sure we undo. Now, when navigating in the F-Curve editor, we'd use the same tools we use to navigate in our viewport. So we can hold down Alt and the middle mouse button to pan, and with Alt and the right mouse button, we'd use this for interactive zooming to get really close to the F-curve that we're modifying to see its change. Also, I'd like to point out that if we have a key selected and we want to really zoom into that key, instead of using Alt and the right mouse button, what we could do is simply use the S key to frame our selection. Now, if we were to use the H key, we can go back to the entire range. So those are some tools we have at our disposal. Now let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to clean up our animation and remove that pause. First, we need to find the culprit. Now, as of right now, it's kind of hard to just view one F-curve, because currently under our Functions menu, F-Curve menu, we have Show All Tracks enabled. If we were to go ahead and turn this off, now we will only see the result of the selected track. So that's great. And what's also nice is that when we select between tracks, whether we have that mode on or off, we can see the keyframes load up on our timeline ruler. So notice if we were to select the rotation pitch axis, we see only the keys on 0 and 60. And right now 60 is hidden, of course. But that's what we'd see. If we were to select the bank axis, now we could see its keyframe data. Again, really exciting stuff. Just a way to keep track of our work. But now what we'll do is go ahead and press the H key so we can get a closer look at our function curve. And now we can see exactly why we run into that pause. If we were to go ahead and select the keyframe on frame 1, you can see that we have this line that extends out of the key, and this is called a tangent. So this is what we can use to start adjusting the curvature of our F-curve, or essentially our interpolation. So what we can do then, rather than adding extra keys and cluttering up our F-Curve Manager, we could start to use these tangent handles to adjust how our animation behaves. And in this case, we can use them to smooth out our animation so we don't have that pause. We can see because of these flat lines at the start and end why we run into that pause. And we'll see that even clearly why the animation pauses when we loop the animation. So what we'll do is work on looping it first, and then we will remove this pause we see. So in order to loop the animation, it's just a matter of selecting the tracks that we'd like to loop. I'll just go ahead and select the very top node here, our animation control. So we have all of our tracks highlighted. And now I'll press the H key to view all, and I'll kind of back up a bit so we can see the change. But watch this. When we head over to our functions menu, we can now choose track before to loop the animation before time, and track after to loop the animation after time. We cannot access these just yet, not until we select our keys. So what I'll do is go ahead and go back to the functions menu, and I'm going to go ahead and loop the animation before time by choosing repeat before. And then I'll make sure that the animation loops after our last keyframe by choosing track after, repeat after. So watch this. If I were to just minimize the timeline and increase our range to, let's say, frame 120, I'll also adjust the playback maximum time to that range. You'll see that now we have another repetition of our cycle, of our animation. What happens when we go ahead and set this to an even higher value, let's say 300? You'll see that as we scrub past 120, we no longer see a loop. Now this might seem a bit tricky, but what this tells us is that Cinema 4D allows us to adjust how many repetitions we would like to have when we cycle. So I love this type of control because now we can say, all right, I'd like the cycle to end at this particular time. So let's go ahead and learn how to have it loop for even longer. It's just a matter of going to our timeline, selecting the tracks we'd like to loop. So again, I'll just go ahead and select the top animation control so we can have all of our tracks loop longer. And now we can go to this repetition channel here to adjust the time after our last key, and the channel before will allow us to adjust the timing before. We may not need to adjust before, but we most certainly would want to adjust the time after. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to about 5, just so we can take a look at what happens now in our F-curve manager. So now if we were to go ahead and back up, you can see that our animation is going to loop for 5 more cycles. If I were to set this back to 1, it's only going to take what we've currently animated and loop that just once more. So that's how this works. And again, I find that to be a great tool because then we can go ahead and determine how long we would truly like this to cycle for and then stop it after a certain point. All right, beautiful. So we've learned how to cycle the animation. Let's go ahead and remove that nasty pause. I'll simply go ahead and select the rotation bank track and press the H key to view the F-curve more closely, and here we can see that pause while we run into that issue, this flat line. So now let's go ahead and select our start and end keys, and with them both selected we could just start to edit 1/2 of our tangent handle on one key, and that will simultaneously affect the other selected key. So as we start to drag this down, notice we now have a very smooth blend from our cycled curve into the actual function curve. What this means is that if we were to close out our F-curve manager and play the animation back, no longer are we going to run into that nasty pause. So in this lesson, we have learned how to manage keyframes in Cinema 4D's powerful F-curve manager. In the next lesson, I'm going to go ahead and show you a few ways we can copy and paste animation.